Ethan was a man who worked with machines every single day in a quiet corner of Earth, and his life was simple with no dreams. Beyond fixing broken engines and writing small ideas in his notebook. But that all changed on the day the sky spoke to him in a voice that was not human. He had been alone in his workshop late at night, when the lights began to flicker and the radio on the shelf turned on by itself even though it had no power, and a voice came through the static like a whisper that grew louder and louder until it filled the entire room with a message that was not meant for anyone else on this planet. And the voice said, "Act fast, human, your choice will decide your fate forever." And then the signal ended, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the mountains outside. Ethan stared at the radio and felt his heart beating like a drum in a storm, and he could not understand what he had just heard, but deep inside he knew this was not a dream and not a trick, because the voice had spoken his language, and it had sounded urgent, like time was running out, and the way it said human made him feel small, like a child standing before something too big to see. He ran outside and looked at the sky, and the stars seemed brighter than ever, and some of them moved in patterns like they were alive and watching. And then his phone buzzed with a message that had no name, no number, and only the same words, "Act fast, human, your choice will decide your fate forever." And then a set of coordinates that pointed to a desert far away from any city. He could have ignored it. He could have gone back inside and told himself it was nothing, but something in his chest told him that this was real, and that if he turned away the world would pay a price too great to imagine. So he packed his old truck with water and fuel and drove through the night, with the road stretching like a black river under the moon, and the coordinates glowing on the screen like a warning and a promise. Hours passed, and the desert swallowed the road, and the silence grew so deep that he could hear his own breath like thunder. And when he reached the final point, the ground shook under his feet as if the earth itself was waking up, and the sand began to move like water flowing away. And from beneath the ground rose something that no human eyes should have seen. It was a ship, but not like any ship built by human hands. It was alive with light pulsing across its surface, like veins carrying energy, and it made no sound, yet it spoke without words inside. His mind asking him to come closer, asking him to trust, asking him to leave everything he knew behind. And Ethan stood frozen, because he knew that if he took one step forward, he would never go back to the life he had before. The ramp opened with a glow that bathed the desert in blue, and the air felt warm like a breath from another world, and his legs moved even though his mind screamed to stop. And when he stepped inside the ship, the ramp closed behind him with a sound like a heartbeat, and he felt the ground vanish as the ship rose into the sky with a force that stole the air from his lungs. And in that moment, he knew he had crossed a line that no human had ever crossed before. Inside the ship there were no walls, no doors, only endless space filled with shifting lights and shapes that had no name. And they moved like thoughts made visible, and at the center stood something that looked like a figure, but not a person. Its body was made of light, and its face was a mask of stars, and when it spoke, there were no words, only meaning pouring into his mind like a river, and the meaning was simple and terrible. "You are the one." Ethan tried to speak, but his voice was lost in the vastness, and the being moved closer until its light wrapped around him like a cloak, and it showed him images that burned into his mind, worlds falling into fire, ships tearing each other apart, suns dying, and then earth blue and small and fragile, hanging in darkness as a shadow came to swallow it. And the voice said, "You will choose, and your choice will decide if your kind lives or dies." And the weight of those words crushed him until he could hardly breathe. He wanted to ask, why him? Why a man who fixed engines in a forgotten corner of Earth? But the answer came before he could form the thought. Because you see what others do not, because you hold the pattern, because the key is not in power, but in the heart and the mind of a do not single human. And now that human is you. And then the being showed him two paths, one where Earth burned, and one where Earth rose to the stars. And it said, "You will stand before the choice soon, and when you do, you must act fast, for time is the enemy, and hesitation is death. And then the lights dimmed, and the ship moved faster than thought, and Ethan felt the pull of something beyond stars pulling him into a fate he never asked for and could never escape. Ethan felt his body pressed against a soft surface that was not like any floor he had ever known. It was warm and alive like skin, and it pulsed with light that matched the beating of his heart. And when he tried to stand, his legs shook because the air inside this place was thick with something that was not oxygen, yet he could breathe, and the air carried whispers that felt like thoughts brushing against his mind. Looked around and saw shapes forming out of light, twisting and turning like streams of fire, and from those streams, figures began to rise tall and bright, like towers made of living glass, and they moved with grace, like flowing water, and when they spoke there were no sounds, only meaning that sank into his mind like heavy stones, and the meaning was simple. You are in the chamber of judgment. Ethan wanted to speak, but his mouth felt dry and useless, so his thoughts screamed instead, "What do you want from me? Why am I here?" And the answer came like a voice that was everywhere and nowhere, because only you can decide what happens next, and your decision will shape the fate of not only your species, but all that exists in the spiral of light and dark. The light around him shifted, and the chamber stretched into infinity, and in that endless space, a wall appeared, glowing like molten silver, and on that wall, two shapes emerged side by side, like two hearts carved from light. One pulsed with a red glow that felt sharp and violent, and the other shimmered with soft blue that carried a calm that was almost painful. And the voice spoke again, "These are the paths before you, and you will choose one." Ethan stepped closer and felt his skin crawl as waves of energy rolled from the wall, and when he reached out, his fingers tingled like fire, but before he could touch the surface, the wall exploded into visions that slammed into his mind, and he fell to his knees as images burned behind his eyes. He saw Earth torn apart by fire, seas boiling, skies cracking, and cities falling into black pits, and voices screaming as the stars turned red. And then he saw something else, a world of peace, oceans clear like glass, forests so green they glowed, and humans walking under skies filled with ships that shined like diamonds. And the voice whispered, "One of these futures is yours, but the choice will not be simple, because each path has a price." Ethan forced himself to stand and shouted inside his mind, "What do you mean, what price?" And the answer came sharp like a blade, "Because to create peace you must give what you value most, and to destroy you need only act without thought, and the price of peace is heavy, heavier than the weight of your world, heavier than the breath in your lungs and the blood in your veins." Words cut deep, and fear crawled through him like ice, because he understood that this was not just a game, this was not just a vision. This was real, and the price would be real, and he wondered what he had that could be worth more than a world. And then the floor under his feet shifted, and he fell forward into darkness, and the chamber vanished like smoke in the wind. When the darkness faded, Ethan was standing in a place that looked like Earth, but not the Earth. He knew the sky was black like oil, and the ground was red like rust, and the air smelled of burning metal. And in the distance towers rose like broken teeth, and shapes moved between them, shapes that were almost human but twisted with wires and steel. And when they turned their faces toward him, he saw empty eyes glowing with hate and hunger. One of the shapes moved fast like a shadow cutting through the air, and Ethan barely stepped aside as it slammed into the ground where he had been standing, and the ground cracked like glass under its weight. And then it lunged again, and he ran because there was nothing else to do, and his legs burned as he stumbled across the wasteland with the sound of metal feet pounding behind him. And he thought, if this is one of the paths, then I will never choose it. I will never let this happen. He saw a light ahead like a door opening in the sky, and he ran for it with every breath tearing his chest. And when he reached the light, he leapt without thinking, and the world of metal and death vanished like a dream, and he crashed onto a floor smooth like glass, and the light figures stood above him again, and their voices poured into his mind. "You have seen the shadow, now you will see the light." The floor dissolved and he was standing on a hill covered in green grass, and the air was sweet like spring, and the sun was warm on his face. And in the valley below, there were cities of silver that shined like stars, and people walking together without fear, and the sky was filled with ships like birds gliding in silence, and he felt something break inside him, because it was beautiful, more beautiful than anything he had ever seen, and he wanted it to be real, so badly that his hands shook. But then he heard the voice again, and it was cold as the void. Remember, human, every gift demands a sacrifice, and if you choose this path, you will give what cannot be returned. And Ethan felt his heart tighten because he understood what they meant. And the truth hit him like fire. If he chose peace, he would never see his home again, never feel the wind on earth, never hear the voices of the people he loved, because his life would be the price. He fell to his knees and his hands dug into the grass. That was not real, and he screamed inside his mind, why me? Why not someone stronger, someone who can carry this better? And the voice whispered, because you still ask. Why? Because you still care, because only those who doubt deserve to decide, and that is why you were chosen. And before he could answer, the world of green dissolved, and the chamber returned, and the two shapes on the wall pulsed brighter than before, red and blue, like two hearts waiting to stop beating. The voice came again, and it was a command. Now choose. Ethan stood frozen as the voice echoed through the chamber. Choose. But his legs would not move, and his thoughts spun like a storm, because he knew this was not just a question, this was the edge of everything he knew and loved. And then the walls of light began to shift and twist like smoke, and the two glowing shapes faded into darkness, and the floor vanished under his feet, and he was falling through endless black. He tried to scream, but no sound came out, and his body tumbled like a leaf in a storm until he hit something hard. But there was no pain, only a rush of air, and when he opened his eyes, he was not in the chamber anymore. He was standing in a street he knew from his childhood, the cracked road, the small houses, the sound of wind through the trees, and for a moment he thought he had been sent home. But then he saw the sky. It was red like blood, and the clouds boiled like fire, and his heart turned cold. Voices echoed from the houses, voices he knew, voices of people he had loved. But they sounded wrong, like echoes trapped in a cave. And when he stepped forward, the door of the nearest house opened, and his mother walked out smiling, like she used to when he was a boy, and he wanted to run to her and hold her. But then her face melted like wax and turned into a mask of ash, and her eyes burned with white fire, and she said, why did you leave us? Why did you choose them over your own blood? And then her body broke into dust that blew away on the wind. Ethan fell to his knees, and tears ran down his face as the dust of his mother swirled around him. And then the ground cracked, and a river of black fire roared up, swallowing the street. And he ran because there was nothing else to do, and the houses burned, and the voices screamed, why, Ethan, why? And the sound cut into his soul like knives. And then the street ended, and he fell again into darkness. This time, when he opened his eyes, he was standing in a great hall with walls of silver that rose so high they touched a sky full of stars. And at the center of the hall was a table, and on that table were objects from his life. A wrench from his workshop, a photograph of his father, a book he had read as a child, and behind the table stood a figure cloaked in shadow with eyes like black holes. And the voice came from that shadow, cold and endless. What makes a human? Human. Ethan stared at the objects, and then at the figure, and his voice finally broke free. It is not these things, it is what we feel. It is hope and love and pain, and the will to go on even when we are broken. And the shadow moved closer and said, then prove it. And the hall dissolved like smoke, and Ethan was standing on a battlefield under a black sun. Ground was littered with bodies, men, women, children, faces twisted in pain, and above them hung machines like giant insects, their wings cutting through the air with a sound like screaming. And in his hands was a weapon, heavy and cold, and he knew, without being told, that these machines were the enemy, and if he did nothing they would destroy everything and everyone he loved. And the voice came again, kill them, Ethan, kill them all, and your world will live. His hands shook as he raised the weapon. And the machines swooped down, their claws flashing, and their voices hissing in a tongue that was not of earth, and he pulled the trigger. And light exploded, and one machine fell burning, and the others screamed, and he fired again and again, until the sky was full of falling metal and fire, and the ground shook, like the world itself was breaking. And when it was over, there was silence, and he looked down and saw that the bodies of the machines had turned into people, people he knew, people he loved, their faces frozen in death. And the weapon fell from his hands, and he screamed until his throat tore. Voice came again, soft as a whisper, "Is this your humanity, to kill and call it survival?" And Ethan dropped to his knees and said, "No. No, it is not." And the voice said, "Then what will you do when every choice leads to blood?" And Ethan closed his eyes and said, "I will still choose hope, even if it kills me, because without hope we are nothing." And the silence that followed was so deep. He thought he had died. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the chamber of light, and the two shapes were there again, pulsing brighter than before, red and blue, like two hearts beating in the dark. And the voice filled his mind, "You have faced the shadow, you have faced the light, and now the test is done, and the final choice is here. Choose now." And the floor shook and the air burned, and Ethan felt the weight of every life on earth pressing down on his shoulders like mountains. And he knew there was no running, no hiding, only the choice. And the voice spoke again, "Act fast, human. Your choice will decide your fate forever." Ethan stepped forward, and the light of the two shapes wrapped around him like fire, one side burning red with rage and power, the other blue with calm and peace. And his hands rose without his will, drawn to both paths like magnets. And the voice came one last time, "Choose." Chambers shook like a living thing as Ethan stood between the two lights, one burning red and the other glowing blue. And the voice roared inside his head like thunder, "Choose, because time is gone, and the edge of everything is breaking, and if you do not act, now all will fall into the dark forever." Ethan tried to move, but his legs felt like stone because he could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on him like the sky. And every breath hurt like knives, and the two shapes pulsed faster and faster, like two hearts racing toward death. And the floor cracked under his feet, spilling light like rivers of fire, and the air burned hot and heavy, and it felt like the chamber was alive and angry because he had waited too long. He took a step forward, and the red light flared so bright, it seared his eyes and filled his mind with visions of war, endless war, fire and blood, burning cities and ships like blades, cutting through the stars, and voices screaming in agony. And then the vision shifted to victory, worlds falling before his feet, empires bowing to his power. And the voice whispered from the red light, "Choose this path, and your world will rule the stars. Choose this, and none will dare to challenge you." And Ethan felt the rush of power like a storm inside his veins, and for one moment he wanted it. He wanted to crush the fear and the doubt and hold the universe in his hands. But then the blue light glowed soft and deep, and it filled him with visions of peace, skies clear as glass, oceans shining like silver, forests alive with song and laughter that warmed the soul, and cities without walls where no one carried fear. And in the heart of that vision he saw himself standing among his people, smiling and free. But then the vision broke, and the voice from the blue light whispered, "If you choose this path, your world will live, but the price will be everything you are, because peace is not born from nothing, it is born from sacrifice, and that sacrifice will be you." Ethan staggered back as the two voices clashed inside his head, one promising glory and power, and the other promising peace and harmony, but both carrying the shadow of loss. And his heart pounded so hard it felt like it would tear out of his chest, because he knew the truth. He knew there was no path without pain, and no choice without blood. And he wanted to run. He wanted to wake up and find it was all a dream. But the chamber burned around him, and the voice thundered again, "Act fast, human, or all is lost." The floor shook harder, and cracks of red light ripped through it like veins of fire, and from those cracked shapes began to rise tall and jagged like shards of glass, twisting into forms that were almost alive, and they crawled toward him with mouths like blades and eyes like burning holes, and the voice said, "These are the children of delay. Every second you wait, they will grow and they will feed, and soon they will tear your world apart." And Ethan stumbled backward as the shapes lunged at him, their mouths opening wide with screams that sounded like the cries of the dying. He ran because there was no other choice, and the ground crumbled behind him, falling into a pit of light that burned like a sun, and the two shapes still pulsed ahead of him, red and blue, like two stars at war, and the voice screamed, "Choose. Choose now before the shadow eats your world." And Ethan threw himself forward, falling to his knees before the lights, his hands shaking like leaves in a storm, and he looked at the red glow and felt the heat of its promise of strength and power. And he looked at the blue glow and felt the calm of its promise of peace and hope, and his heart broke because both were beautiful and both were terrible, and he whispered, "I cannot do this." The voice came cold and sharp, "Then your kind will die." And the lights flared so bright they swallowed the chamber in fire, and the sound of breaking worlds filled his ears. And then the fire vanished, and he was standing in a field of stars, endless and cold and silent, and before him stood a figure made of shadows with eyes like black suns, and it spoke in a voice that shook the void. "There is no one else. There never was, only you. And what you choose here will burn into the fabric of time and space." And the shadow raised its hand, and the stars cracked like glass, and darkness poured out like blood, and Ethan fell to his knees and screamed, "I cannot choose." And the shadow whispered, "You must, or all ends now." He felt the universe tremble like a dying heart, and then he saw them, faces in the dark, faces of children laughing, faces of lovers holding hands, faces of the old and the broken and the lost, and he saw his own face, and behind it the face of every human who had ever lived. And in that moment he understood the truth. The choice was not about him. It was never about him. It was about them, all of them. And if he failed, they would be nothing but dust on the wind of eternity. The two lights appeared again, red and blue, brighter than suns. And the voice came one last time, "Act fast, human. Your choice will decide your fate forever." And the stars began to collapse one by one, falling into the black, like sparks dying in the dark. And Ethan reached out his hands, tears burning his face as the lights drew him in, and his heart thundered like the drums of war. And he whispered to the void, "Let it be right." And then the chamber shattered like glass, and the lights exploded into fire, and everything went black. Ethan opened his eyes and saw nothing but endless dark, a silence so deep it crushed the sound of his breath, and he thought for one broken moment that he was dead, that the chamber had burned him away like ash. But then a whisper curled through the void like smoke, "You have chosen, and your choice will now shape the bones of time and the blood of stars." And Ethan felt his heart twist because he could not remember what he had done. His hands were empty, and his mind was fog like the ruins of a storm, and yet something inside him said it was done. Darkness began to split like cracked glass, and through the cracks poured light, blue and pure, like the first sky after endless rain. And Ethan felt its warmth wash over him like a tide, and the voice spoke again, soft and deep. "The price is taken, and the path is written, and your kind will live, but not all gifts are free." And in that moment he knew what the price was before the voice even said it, and his chest ached like a wound because the price was himself. The light grew brighter, and the cracks widened until the void shattered, and he was standing on a plain of white, stretching forever like a sea of frost, and in the distance towers rose like blades of crystal glowing with fire from within, and around him moved shapes of light, tall and graceful, like rivers walking, and they came close and bowed their heads, and the voice spoke through them, "You have done what no one else could. You have given what no one else would, and for this your world is free. Your people will rise, and your name will echo in the heart of the stars, but you will not go." Back Ethan fell to his knees as the weight of those words slammed into him like a hammer, because the truth was not a wound, it was a blade, and it cut him clean and deep. He would never see the sun over his home again, never feel the earth under his feet, never hear the voices of those he loved. And the thought tore through him like fire, and he wanted to scream, but no sound came, only a broken whisper of a question. Why must this be? And the voice answered, because peace is not given, it is earned, and the cost of harmony is always blood. And this time the blood was yours. The plain began to change like melting ice, and in its place rose a vision of earth green and alive oceans, shining like silver cities bright as stars, and above them ships, gliding like birds across a sky of endless blue. And Ethan felt tears burn his eyes because it was beautiful, so beautiful that it broke his heart, and he whispered, at least they live, and the voice said, they live because of you. And for a moment, the pain lifted, and a quiet filled him, not peace, not joy, but something close to both. Then the vision faded, and he was standing before a gate made of light so bright it burned the dark away, and beyond the gate stretched an ocean of stars, rolling like waves. And the voice said, this is where you go now, to the heart of creation, to the place where all paths end and all paths begin. And Ethan took one step, then another, and his body felt like smoke, like wind, like something that was not flesh and blood anymore. And the gate opened without sound, and the light wrapped around him like arms, and the stars swallowed him whole back on earth. The sky burned not with fire, but with wonder, as ships of light filled the heavens like a river of stars. And the people looked up with fear and hope, tangled like vines. And then the ships spoke not with voices, but with a music that shook the bones of the world. And the music said, the war is ended, the dark is broken, because one of you chose what none could choose, and his name will be carved in the breath of time and the hearts of men. And the people wept and raised their hands to the sky as the ships began to work, shaping the air and the earth and the seas into something new, something bright, something that would never break again. In a quiet valley where the wind danced through fields of green, the child looked up at the ships and asked his mother, who saved us? And the mother smiled through tears and said, a man who gave everything. And the child asked, will we ever see him? And the mother said, no, but when you look at the stars, you will know he is there. And the child turned his eyes to the sky, and for one heartbeat, he thought he saw a shape in the light, a figure walking across the edge of the universe, his head held high and his steps burning like fire. And then the shape was gone, but the feeling stayed like a flame in the dark, far beyond the reach of suns. Ethan stood on a shore that was not a shore before a sea that was not a sea. And the stars sang around him in voices older than time, and he felt the weight of his choice fall away like dust. And the silence was no longer empty, it was full. And he closed his eyes and whispered to the endless light, let it be worth it. And the light answered, it was and always will be. And then there was nothing but the glow of eternity and the echo of a human heartbeat in the dark, the end.